What would you do if a stranger showed up at your door soaked from the rain with no explanation, only a quiet plea? Please, don't Google me. This is the story of a single father, a simple act of kindness, and how one ordinary night became the beginning of something unforgettable. If you love heartfelt stories that remind us of the quiet power of compassion, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a moment that just might change your perspective. Now, let's begin. Single dad heard her say, "Don't Google me." The next morning, her passed. Arrived by helicopter, Portland, Oregon, 10:37 p.m. The rain hadn't let up for hours. It beat down like a warning on the rusted hood of Caleb Rhodes's delivery van, the wipers struggling to push aside the downpour as he guided the vehicle through the nearly empty streets. In the back seat, 5-year-old Sophie had finally drifted off, cradling a purple stuffed rabbit against her cheek, her hair damp from where he'd hurried her through the cold. Caleb glanced at the dashboard clock, then down at the bandage on Sophie's forehead. Just a scratch, thank God, but it had bled more than it should have, and she'd cried more from fear than pain. He'd swung by the 24-hour pharmacy for ointment and gauze, and now they were almost home. Almost. He turned left onto Burnside and was about to pass the old Halstead Inn when a scene at the edge of the portico made him tap the brakes. A woman, late 20s or early 30s, was being shoved out the front doors by a wiry man in a stiff blazer. Her hair clung to her face in rain-soaked waves, her clothes disheveled and clearly out of place, a silk blouse stained with dirt slacks rolled at the ankles, no coat, no purse. Just her and a small plastic bag that barely held a phone charger and a bottle of water. "I told you, lady. No ID, no room. We're not a shelter," the manager barked, waving her away as she stood there shivering. She didn't argue, didn't beg. She just stood still, eyes distant like someone who had run out of words or strength. Caleb's hand tightened on the wheel. He didn't need this. Not tonight. He had a daughter to take care of, rent to catch up on, and barely enough in the bank to make it to next week. He didn't even know who this woman was. Maybe she was high. Maybe this was a scam. But then Sophie stirred in the back seat and whispered half asleep, "Daddy." "Is it raining inside?" Caleb looked at the girl again. She wasn't panicking, wasn't screaming, just standing, drenched, alone. Something hit him in the chest. He pulled over. He stepped out hoodie-soaked in seconds and approached her slowly like approaching a wounded animal. "Ma'am," he said, "are you okay?" She turned her head, meeting his eyes for the first time. And for a moment, just a flicker, he saw something underneath the exhaustion. Fear, yes, but also dignity. Like someone who had once stood taller but had been knocked down so many times she'd forgotten how. "I just needed a place to sit for a while," she said softly. "They wouldn't let me. I'm not here to cause trouble." "You have anywhere to go?" She hesitated. "Not tonight." The manager stepped back outside, phone in hand. "I'm calling the cops. You can't loiter here." "Hold on," Caleb said. "She's with me." The manager narrowed his eyes. "You know her?" Caleb didn't blink. "She's my cousin. Visiting from out of state. Her phone died. Miscommunication." The lie tasted strange in his mouth, foreign but solid. A protective instinct kicked in like a reflex. The man looked at them both, unimpressed. Then, get her off the property. Caleb reached into the van, unbuckled Sophie, and gently wrapped her in the blanket from the back seat. Sophie rubbed her eyes, confused but calm. "Say hi to Auntie Claire," Caleb said, nudging her gently. Sophie blinked at the stranger. "Hi," she mumbled, then nestled into Caleb's shoulder. The woman, Claire for now, looked stunned. She mouthed a silent thank you as Caleb opened the passenger door. "Let's get you somewhere dry," he said. She nodded, got in, and said nothing else until they reached the tiny apartment complex 12 minutes later. The building Caleb lived in wasn't much peeling paint, flickering hallway lights, a front door that stuck in the rain, but it was warm, safe, and his. He led her into the one-bedroom unit, switching on the kitchen light and motioning toward the couch. "I'll get you a towel. Bathroom's through there. Sorry, it's not much." She stood in the middle of the room, dripping silently, arms at her sides. "You didn't have to do that," she said finally. "I know. You don't know me." "I know that, too." She looked at Sophie now, curled up on the couch with her bunny already drifting again. Then back at him. "Why did you lie?" Caleb leaned against the counter. "You looked like someone who stopped expecting people to be kind. And that's when someone needs it the most." She exhaled, part relief, part exhaustion, and took the towel he offered. "I'm Lena," she said quietly. "Just Lena." He nodded. "I'm Caleb. That's Sophie." Lena went into the bathroom to change into the dry clothes he handed her, his ex-wife's old hoodie and sweatpants folded and forgotten at the back of a drawer. While she changed, he made a bowl of soup and poured the last of the milk into a glass. She returned, hair damp but brushed face freshly washed. In the clean clothes, she looked less like a stranger and more like someone who might belong. She sat at the table and stared down at the food like it was a gift from another world. "Thank you," she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. Caleb shrugged. "It's nothing fancy. It's not the soup," she said. "It's the seat." Before he could ask what she meant, she added softly, "Please, don't Google me. Just for tonight. Let me be no one." Caleb didn't reply. He simply nodded, sat down across from her and passed the spoon. They ate in silence. Not uncomfortable silence, but the kind that says, "We'll talk later. For now, let's just survive this night." Outside, the rain fell harder. But inside, for the first time in days, Lena wasn't running. And Caleb, who had long since stopped expecting surprises, was about to discover the one choice he made out of kindness would lead to a truth that could change everything. The next morning arrived not with sunlight but with the dull gray of overcast skies pressing against the windows. Portland had a way of softening everything, edges, colors, memories. Caleb stirred awake in the worn recliner near the couch, the blanket still draped over his shoulders, his neck stiff from an awkward night of half-sleep. He turned his head. Lena was still there. She lay curled up under the same blanket Sophie had used last winter, one hand tucked beneath her cheek, the other resting on her stomach. Her face was softer in sleep. The tightness in her jaw had relaxed. For the first time, Caleb could see traces of something else youth, maybe. Peace, or maybe just exhaustion that had finally settled into stillness. Sophie's room was quiet. She'd stayed asleep through the night undisturbed by the presence of a stranger on their couch. Caleb couldn't decide if that meant his daughter was too trusting, or if it was because Lena's presence didn't feel threatening. In truth, it didn't. Not in the slightest. He got up quietly, made coffee, and scrambled eggs with the last of the carton. While the pan sizzled, he caught himself glancing at Lena more than once. What was it about her that made his gut twist? Not attraction, though she was undeniably beautiful, but something else. A question that hovered unsaid. Something behind her eyes last night when she said not to Google her. The way she phrased it, "Let me be no one." That wasn't just humility. It was grief. Or guilt. The couch creaked softly as Lena stirred. Caleb didn't look. He wanted her to have the space to rise slowly on her own terms. When she stood and padded into the kitchen barefoot and still wearing the hoodie, she looked around sheepishly. "I slept like a rock," she said. "I hope your daughter wasn't too weirded out." Caleb poured her coffee. "She thinks you're my cousin. You'll probably be invited to her next tea party." Lena laughed a light melodic sound that surprised both of them. She took the mug, carefully wrapping her fingers around it like it might disappear. "I'll be out of your hair soon," she said. "Promise. I just needed one night." Caleb didn't respond immediately. He flipped the eggs onto 2 plates and motioned for her to sit. "You want ketchup?" She blinked. "For eggs?" He smirked. "We're an unapologetically ketchup-on-eggs household." Lena tilted her head. Rebellious. They ate quietly, the casualness of breakfast, slowly stitching something between them, thread by thread. Not familiarity, but maybe the start of it. "You from Portland?" Caleb asked. No. Her tone shut that door quickly, but she softened. Somewhere warmer. Somewhere where people usually don't make room for strangers. Not a fan of rain. Then I used to love it. I think I still do, just not when it follows you everywhere you go. That line stayed with him. She wasn't just passing through. She was running. Lena, he said slowly, you don't have to tell me anything you don't want to. But you should know. I'm not looking to report you, or fix you, or expect anything. She set down her fork and looked at him with the kind of clarity that left no room for misunderstanding. I believe you. They sat for a moment in that strange calm. Then Sophie padded out of her room, half-asleep Bunny dragging behind her. Auntie Claire, she mumbled, still using the name from last night. You stayed, Lena gave a gentle smile. Only until you kick me out? You can't go yet. We have waffles on Sundays, Sophie declared. It's Thursday, kiddo, Caleb reminded gently. Then we wait, Sophie said simply before curling onto Lena's lap like it had always been hers to take. Caleb stared. Lena hesitated for only a moment before wrapping her arm protectively around the child, resting her cheek lightly on Sophie's tangled curls. It was the most natural thing in the world. And somehow, the most unnatural this stranger, this woman with no past and no name, that checked out sitting in the heart of his little world as if she'd always belonged there. After Sophie had wandered back to her room to find her crayons, Caleb started clearing the dishes. Lena rose to help, but Caleb stopped her with a hand on her wrist. You don't have to rush off, he said. You can stay one more night, just if you want. She looked down at where his hand rested. Not offended, just thoughtful. You don't know what you're offering, she said more to herself than to him. I'm offering you a place to breathe, he replied quietly. That's all. That afternoon, Caleb went out to finish his deliveries, reluctantly leaving Sophie and Lena behind. But when he returned that evening, the apartment had changed. Not drastically, just in little ways. The kitchen had been cleaned. Sophie's toy bin reorganized. The window above the sink had been fixed to actually close, fully something Caleb had meant to do for months. On the table sat a folded note. I'm not good at being still, but I want to try. Thank you for the pause. L. She hadn't gone. She was just out walking with Sophie, who insisted Lena see the duck pond a few blocks away. When they returned, cheeks pink from wind and laughter, Lena handed Caleb a bag of groceries. I figured ketchup on eggs guy could use actual food, she said. Caleb chuckled and held the bag like it was a bouquet of roses. I might propose. Hold that thought, she teased, but her eyes flickered vulnerable for a heartbeat. It was the first time he saw her hesitate before smiling, like her heart wanted to believe this was okay but hadn't caught up yet. Later, after Sophie fell asleep and the city quieted down, Caleb handed Lena a blanket and a pillow, but she didn't take them right away. She stood by the window looking out into the night. The rain had returned light and persistent, tapping against the glass like a memory. When I said not to Google me, she said, voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't just a request. Caleb didn't speak. He waited. She turned to him. It's a warning. Then she climbed onto the couch, curled beneath the blanket, and closed her eyes. Caleb stayed standing for a long while, staring at her. And though she'd just warned him, he realized he still wasn't afraid. The days that followed fell into a rhythm Caleb hadn't expected, and he wasn't sure if it comforted or unnerved him. Lena stayed. Not indefinitely, not with declarations or promises, she simply didn't leave. She made the couch hers with a kind of unspoken grace, folding the blanket neatly every morning, setting her cup in the sink without needing to be told, and keeping out of his way when he rushed out for early shifts. But at night, when the apartment lights dimmed and Sophie's breathing steadied into sleep, Lena would sit at the kitchen table with a mug of tea, barefoot, her hair tied up messily, flipping through Sophie's picture books as if they were scripture. Sometimes she hummed softly, old jazz tunes or maybe lullabies, and sometimes when she thought no one was listening, she whispered lines to herself, not prayers, not regrets. They sounded like instructions, or reminders. One breath at a time. No headlines, no past. On the third night, Caleb came home later than usual, drenched from a surprise storm. He kicked off his boots at the door and paused when he saw the scene before him. Lena and Sophie were sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by paper cranes and magazine scraps. Sophie was giggling uncontrollably while Lena, with a ridiculously serious expression, attempted to teach her how to fold a swan. "It's not working," Sophie declared through a hiccup of laughter. "You're trying to make it fly before it learns to stand," Lena replied, mock-stern. "Try again." Caleb leaned against the doorframe, watching the two of them like a man watching a dream he didn't remember asking for. "You're corrupting my child," he said finally. Lena glanced up unfazed. She already insisted the paper crane's name is Captain Ketchup, so I think she was corrupted long before I arrived. He chuckled, dropped his keys on the counter, and toed off his socks. Fair enough. Later, as Sophie dozed in her room, Caleb found Lena refilling the kettle. He pulled 2 mugs down from the cabinet without asking, setting them beside her. "I thought you didn't like rain," he said. "I don't. But your daughter does. She said the ducks look happier when they're wet." Lena smiled faintly, then added, "I think she sees things most people miss." Caleb nodded. "She gets that from her mom." Lena's eyes flicked toward him, curious but restrained. "You never talk about her." "She left," he said simply. "Moved to Denver 2 years ago. Sophie was 3. Said the pace here made her feel invisible. And you stayed." He shrugged. Someone had to be visible to Sophie. Silence settled between them, comfortable but thick with everything unsaid. "You're not what I expected," Lena admitted. "And what did you expect someone who would ask questions? Try to solve me." Caleb gave a slow, tired grin. "I'm a single dad, Lena. I solve spilled juice and overdue bills. The rest I let be." She studied him, eyes darker than usual. "I spent years in rooms where no one spoke to me like I was human. They spoke to my name, my portfolio, my last press quote." Her voice cracked just slightly. "You never even asked for a last name. Didn't think I needed it." That truth hung between them, strangely tender. Lena reached into her pocket and pulled out something small, a charm no bigger than a dime. It looked like a token from an old subway system. She placed it on the table between them. "I used to carry it on every flight," she said. "My dad gave it to me when I got my first investor meeting. Told me I'd need something to remind me where I started." Caleb didn't pick it up. He just looked at it with quiet respect. "Do you still need it?" "Some days," she whispered. "Today, maybe not as much." The moment was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. They both froze. "Expecting someone?" Lena asked quietly. "No." Caleb crossed to the door and opened it cautiously. Mrs. Ortega, their elderly neighbor from 4B, stood there with a Tupperware container in hand and a smile that had too much knowledge behind it. "I made too much rice," she said in her thick accent, pushing the container into his hands. Then she leaned in, glancing past him at the warm light and the sound of distant paper cranes fluttering. "Your new tenant. She's very pretty." "She's not." Caleb started, but she winked. "I didn't ask," she said, and shuffled off her orthopedic shoes, squeaking against the hall tile. He turned back inside to find Lena raising an eyebrow. "I think I've been officially welcomed by the neighborhood matriarch. She charges in, tamales," Caleb said, "and she never forgets a face." Lena grew quiet. That might be a problem. Why? Because one day someone might show her my face on the news. There it was again, the crack in her composure. The reminder that this wasn't just a runaway with a good smile and folding skills. This was someone who had vanished for a reason. But Caleb didn't push. Instead, he offered her a spoon. "You want to taste the rice, or should we just keep folding birds until dawn?" She smiled despite herself. "Let's fold," she said. But I'm warning you, I'm making a dragon next." That night, as she sat beside him on the living room rug with Sophie snoring faintly behind her door, Caleb watched Lena with something that wasn't quite worry and wasn't quite longing. He didn't know what storm had chased her into the rain that night, but he knew deep in his bones that whatever it was, she wasn't ready to face it yet. So he folded cranes, and dragons, and hope into the spaces where words didn't fit, because sometimes the bravest thing a person could do wasn't to fix a broken stranger. It was to sit quietly beside them until they remembered they were never broken to begin with. It was early Saturday morning when the first fracture appeared, not in Lena's mask, but in the illusion that their quiet life was enough to keep reality out. Caleb was in the hallway, crouched over a laundry basket, when he heard a crash from the living room. He rushed in expecting to find Sophie up to one of her usual experiments in gravity and toy stacking, but instead he found Lena frozen in place, her face pale and her hands trembling over a paper bag spilled across the floor. Among the spilled contents, eggs, apples, a loaf of bread, lay something small and metallic, a brushed silver card the size of a hotel key. It gleamed under the light. Caleb bent instinctively to pick it up, but Lena lunged faster, snatching it from the floor as if it were a grenade with the pin pulled. She held it close to her chest, her breathing ragged. He backed off. "Hey, you okay?" She didn't answer, just nodded too quickly, shoved the card deep into her coat pocket, and started gathering the groceries with robotic efficiency. Caleb crouched beside her. "Lena, what was that?" She glanced at him, guilty-cornered and exhausted all at once. "I dropped it, that's all. That wasn't just a card." "No," she said flatly, and then quieter. "It wasn't." He waited. Finally, Lena sat back against the wall, apples rolling gently to a stop near the couch. Her hands trembled in her lap. When she spoke, her voice was strained and hollow. It was an ID from a corporate account. My corporate account. Caleb felt the shift in the room, the tectonic kind. The kind that said nothing would be the same after this moment. He sat across from her, elbows on his knees, calm and steady. "You told me not to Google you," he said. "I did." "I didn't." Lena looked up at him, then startled. "I never Googled you. Not once. I figured if someone says that kind of thing, they've either lost something or run from something. Either way, they deserve peace." Her eyes welled up, but she blinked fast, refusing to cry. "I didn't expect to stay this long," she whispered. "Didn't think you'd let me." "I didn't let you," Caleb said softly. "You just fit. That broke something." She exhaled sharply, a sound between a sob and a laugh, and covered her mouth. Her voice came out low-laced with the kind of pain that comes from trying too hard for too long. "My name is Elena Victoria Marquette," she said. "I was the youngest venture partner at Solace Capital. I ran 3 major funding rounds for emerging tech in under 2 years. I was on the cover of Forbes before I was 30. I gave TED Talks. I wore gowns that cost more than this apartment's annual rent, and none of it felt like mine." Caleb didn't move. He didn't need to. She was already unraveling, and she didn't need pressure, just space to keep going. "I started waking up at 3 a.m., gasping for air. I was surrounded by people, but I'd never felt lonelier. Every decision was watched. Every smile cost something. I had a fiancé I didn't love, and a life curated by publicists." She paused, jaw clenched. "So I walked away. No note, no press statement. Just silence. I bought a prepaid phone, withdrew cash in small amounts, and started moving. Hotels, buses, anything anonymous. And then you ended up outside the Halstead," Caleb said quietly. She nodded. "I ran out of cash. They wouldn't let me stay. I was ready to sleep on the sidewalk when you showed up." Silence followed. Not awkward, but weighty. Lena looked up at him, her voice trembling. "You think I'm insane?" "No," Caleb said without hesitation. "I think you were drowning. And now I think you're still figuring out how to breathe again." Lena wiped her face, managing a shaky laugh. "That's a poetic way of calling me a hot mess." "Everyone's a hot mess in their own way," he said, "but most don't have the guts to leave a cage they built themselves." He stood and offered her a hand. She took it. That night, Caleb found himself sitting at the table alone after Sophie had gone to sleep. Lena had gone for a walk, something she rarely did after dark, but she said she needed air. On the table sat the silver card. She'd left it there without comment next to the origami swan Sophie had made her. He didn't touch it. When she returned, her cheeks were red from wind, her coat zipped to her chin. She paused when she saw him still awake. "I thought you might have used it," she said. "Not my story to read." "I almost hope you would," she murmured. "Then I wouldn't have to keep pretending I'm still no one." Caleb stood and walked over to her. He didn't touch her, just looked at her the way someone might look at a house after a storm, relieved it was still standing, aware that rebuilding takes time. "You're not no one," he said. "But you don't have to be Elena Marquette here. Just be Lena. Just be—" "Okay." She didn't cry this time, but she nodded, slow and deep, like something heavy had shifted inside her. As she curled up on the couch later that night, she whispered something he almost missed. "Thank you for not saving me like I was broken." And Caleb, lying awake on the other side of the room, whispered back just as softly, "You never were." Sunday morning arrived quiet and cold, the kind of gray Portland sky that never made promises. Caleb woke up to the scent of coffee, but no sound. No soft humming, no clink of mug against counter, no whispered conversation between Lena and Sophie at the kitchen table like the past few mornings. Just silence. He pushed off the blanket and stood, glancing instinctively toward the couch. It was empty. The pillow was fluffed, the blanket folded. The space where Lena had curled herself into the rhythm of their lives gone. His heart sank before his brain caught up. He checked the bathroom. Empty. He peeked into Sophie's room. She was still asleep, her bunny tucked under one arm, her other hand curled in the loose fist of a dreamer. He moved through the apartment like someone searching for a missing photograph, something he knew had been there but now doubted ever existed. Then he saw it. A piece of paper folded neatly and placed under the salt shaker on the table. His name written in small, neat letters. Caleb. He unfolded it slowly, the paper soft and warm from being held. "I wish I were the kind of person who knew how to say goodbye without leaving in silence. But I'm not. I've never been good at exits. You gave me space to breathe, Caleb. More than anyone ever has. And I'm terrified that if I stay longer, I'll start to believe I deserve it. I didn't disappear because I didn't care. I disappeared because caring scared me more than being forgotten. Thank you for everything. For breakfast. For not Googling me. For giving Sophie a safe place to land her paper cranes. I hope one day I'm brave enough to come back." Lena Caleb stood at the table for a long time, the note still in his hands, the room colder than it had been 5 minutes earlier. He read the letter again, then again. Each time it landed differently. Disappointment, confusion, a strange sense of loss, as if she'd been some mirage in a desert he never knew he was crossing. Then came the quiet anger, not the loud, punching-the-wall kind, but the ache of knowing you offered someone your trust and they didn't know how to hold it. He spent the day in motion. That was what he did when things didn't make sense. He cleaned out the hall closet, fixed the cabinet hinge that had been squeaking for a month, took Sophie to the park, though the air was still too sharp for swinging. She asked where Auntie Claire was. Caleb said she had to go help a friend. Sophie didn't ask more. She just stared out the window on the drive home, her face pressed to the glass. That night, after Sophie had gone to sleep and the apartment was quiet again, Caleb sat alone at the table, Lena's note in front of him. He could feel her absence like a missing heartbeat. He had let her in truly in, and she'd vanished. He didn't blame her, but he also didn't understand why someone who wanted to disappear would leave a piece of themselves behind. He picked up a pen. "You left without a goodbye, so I'll leave this without expectation. I don't know where you're going. I don't know what you're running from or what you're trying to outrun inside yourself. But I hope you know this. You didn't have to earn the space you took up here. You didn't have to pay rent in paper cranes or scrambled eggs. You didn't have to prove anything. You were enough exactly as you were, and you always will be. Caleb. He folded the letter and slid it into the small drawer in the coffee table. He wasn't mailing it. He wasn't chasing anyone, but it was there just in case. The next morning, the apartment felt off. He burned the toast, spilled the orange juice, forgot to pack Sophie's mittens. He told himself it was just another Monday, but his body knew better. While Sophie was at preschool, he passed the Halstead Inn on his delivery route. He didn't mean to slow down, but he did. Out of habit, out of hope. The same manager stood behind the desk, scowling at his clipboard. "Hey," Caleb said, stepping inside with a package. The man looked up, unimpressed. "Drop it at the front." "What? I'm just curious," Caleb said. "You remember the woman you kicked out a week ago, tall dark hair soaking wet?" The manager's face pinched. "I remember a lot of things. You her boyfriend or something?" "No," Caleb said honestly, "just someone who didn't like seeing people thrown away." The man scoffed. "Lady didn't have ID. Said she forgot her name. People like that. They're ticking bombs. No one normal just disappears like that." Caleb's jaw tightened. Sometimes people leave because they've been surrounded by noise too long and need a place where silence doesn't feel like a threat. The manager rolled his eyes. Caleb left the package, walked out, and didn't look back. That night, after putting Sophie to bed, Caleb sat in the living room with the lights low and the silence loud. He didn't expect her to return. He didn't dare hope for it. But he couldn't stop thinking of the way Lena had looked when she first stepped into his apartment, drenched, exhausted, but still quietly composed. And the way she had started to laugh, fold paper cranes, make lists on sticky notes, find rhythm in their life. She'd let herself soften. Just for a moment. That wasn't nothing. Sometimes people didn't leave because they didn't care. Sometimes they left because they did. The next morning, a blue origami crane sat on his doorstep. No note, no name. Just folded paper creased by hands he knew too well. He picked it up gently and smiled. It was a Wednesday afternoon when the sky finally cleared after a week of endless drizzle, and Caleb felt, however briefly, that things might return to some kind of balance. Not normal. Normal had left when Lena did. But stable, at least. Sophie was napping on the couch, one arm dangling over the side, her bunny still tucked under her chin. Caleb had just returned from a double shift, his boots damp back sore and stomach empty. He barely noticed the black SUV idling at the curb until the knock came. It was sharp, 3 short raps. Not neighborly, not polite. He opened the door cautiously. A man stood on the porch in a pressed charcoal suit, his tie anchored with a gold pin. His hair was slicked back and he wore an earpiece, a detail that made Caleb's gut tighten before the man even spoke. "Mr. Rhodes." Caleb nodded slowly. "Yeah. Can I help you?" The man's face didn't move. "My name is Grant Whitaker. I'm the director of private security for Marquette Holdings." The name struck like a dropped wrench in the pit of his stomach. Whitaker continued. "I'm here on behalf of Miss Elena Marquette." Caleb swallowed. "She's not here. We're aware." "But she was, wasn't she?" Caleb didn't respond. Whitaker shifted, polite but firm. "She's not in any legal trouble. In fact, quite the opposite. Her absence caused considerable disruption. Her board convened an emergency session last week. The media's been circling. Her father's in Zurich trying to negotiate a tech merger while fielding questions about a runaway daughter." Caleb crossed his arms. "So, what do you want from me?" The man didn't blink. "Ms. Marquette asked us to find you, not to interrogate. She simply said, 'Let him know I'm safe and that I never forgot the note he didn't send.'" That stopped Caleb cold. "How did you even find me?" The vehicle she borrowed had GPS backup even when powered off. She disabled the obvious tracker, but We always install redundancies. Of course. Caleb didn't know whether to be impressed or horrified. Whitaker reached into his jacket and produced a small white envelope. She asked that I give you this. Personally. Caleb took the envelope with hesitation. It was plain his name scrawled across the front in handwriting that already felt like memory. He didn't open it. Whitaker nodded once. No cameras, no press, just her message. He turned to leave, then paused. She said something else. She said, "You're the only person in the last decade who looked her in the eyes and didn't see a headline." With that, he returned to the SUV, which slid away from the curb like it had never been there. Caleb stood at the door for a long moment, fingers still clutching the envelope. He didn't open it until that night, after dinner, after Sophie's bath, after the dishes were washed and the lights dimmed. He sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Lena had once folded paper cranes and watched the rain and slowly unsealed the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Caleb. I didn't mean to vanish again. I thought I had to run until I became invisible, but being in your home reminded me what it feels like to be seen and not just watched. The letter you never sent, I found it. You don't owe me anything. But I needed you to know I'm okay. I'm reclaiming pieces of myself one breath at a time. But nothing I build from here will matter unless it's built with truth. And the truth is, I've thought about coming back every day. If you still fold cranes, I'll know I can. Lena Caleb stared at the letter, heart hammering. He didn't know what he expected, but it wasn't this. It wasn't a message from someone who had vanished into silence and somehow still found her way back with words that cut cleaner than absence ever could. He folded the letter carefully and slid it into the drawer where her first note still lived. Then he walked to Sophie's room. "Kiddo," he whispered, kneeling beside her bed. "You up?" She rolled over, bleary-eyed. "Daddy, I need your help with something." The next morning, before the sun had fully climbed over the buildings, they walked down the street to the small community park. The air was still crisp grass damp underfoot. Caleb pulled the string of a small drawstring bag and took out a dozen brightly colored paper cranes, red, yellow, soft green, sky blue. Sophie carried the largest one carefully balanced between her palms. They placed them on the bench Lena had once sat on with Sophie, just the two of them watching ducks and giggling about Captain Ketchup. They left the cranes there, gently weighted with pebbles so they wouldn't blow away. Caleb stepped back and looked at the scene, a silent signal, a message that spoke louder than anything he could have written. If she came, she'd see. And if she didn't, she'd still know someone had waited not with demands, but with hope. That afternoon, he returned from work to find Mrs. Ortega standing by the mailbox, arms crossed like she'd been waiting hours for him. "You got visitors," she said. Caleb blinked. "Who?" She nodded toward his door. Fancy-looking people. Suits. One of them had a camera. They asked if I knew a Caleb Rhodes. I told them you were dead. "You what?" "You're welcome," she muttered and shuffled away. Inside the apartment, Sophie sat on the floor drawing stick figures, one tall, one medium, one very small. "Someone came looking for you," she said without looking up. They looked important. But they didn't smile. Caleb rubbed the bridge of his nose. The world was creeping in. He wasn't surprised, but he was suddenly achingly tired. Not because of the press, but because he knew when Lena returned she wouldn't come alone. She would bring questions, consequences, cameras, but she would also bring truth. And Caleb, who had offered her silence, would now have to decide how loudly he was willing to speak for her, for Sophie, for what they had started to build without meaning to, because the world had knocked. But for the first time in years, he might just be ready to open the door. Lena sat by the window of the penthouse suite overlooking the East River, far from Portland, yet tethered to it by something stronger than geography. A single paper crane sat on the windowsill in front of her, blue, crisp, slightly uneven, but unmistakably Sophie's. It had arrived in a padded envelope forwarded by one of her former assistants, the return address unmarked, but the folding unmistakable. She hadn't cried when she received it. She'd simply sat in the silence of a home that wasn't really hers and stared out the glass while the world behind her throbbed with emails, voicemail requests, press inquiries, and dinner invitations. She used to crave all that noise. Now she couldn't hear it without remembering the hush of Caleb's kitchen, the softness of Sophie's voice asking if dragons could fold wings, the warm clatter of mugs, and the way Caleb never once tried to fix her, only ever made space. It had only been 2 weeks since she left, but it felt like years had unfolded between her breath and his doorway. Her father had flown in the next day, stern-faced, salt-haired, his affection bundled tight beneath layers of business urgency. She hadn't spoken to him in 6 months. His first words had been, "Thank God you're alive," followed immediately by, "We need to schedule a statement." She hadn't scheduled anything. Instead, she asked for quiet, a sabbatical, a break that no one could spin. They didn't know how to respond to that. In the world she came from, time off wasn't recovery. It was weakness. Absence was a threat. Vulnerability a liability. But Caleb had called it something else. Breathing. And somehow that had felt more revolutionary than any pitch she'd ever given in a boardroom. She fingered the folded paper, now tracing the crease, remembering the warmth of Sophie's hand pressed into hers. That child hadn't just given her comfort. She'd given her permission to be kind to herself. And Caleb, he had never once asked her for anything. Not her name, not her past, not even her future. That's what broke her most. That's what stayed. Because for the first time in her adult life she had experienced unconditional presence. Not love wrapped in ambition, not attention bartered through performance. Just being. Sitting in silence with someone who didn't need a press release to know she mattered. The memory that wouldn't leave her, though, was from her final night there. She'd come out of the bathroom to find Caleb sitting at the table, turning a note over in his hands. He didn't say a word, just nodded as she passed him to the couch. She hadn't told him she was leaving. She hadn't told him she'd already packed. But in the quiet, he had sensed it. And he'd let her go. That undid her. Because when someone lets you go without bitterness, just sorrow, that's when you realize what you were given. That's when you understand the weight of what you're walking away from. Now, in this high-rise silence, she couldn't unknow that feeling. She stood, moved to the corner of the suite, and opened a sleek black duffel. Inside it, buried beneath a rolled scarf, was the note Caleb had written, but never sent, the one she found folded between the couch cushions tucked behind the swan Sophie had insisted she take. She had read it only once, but it had lived inside her ever since. You were enough exactly as you were. She'd lived her life building empires out of expectation. Now she was beginning to wonder if there was more courage in simplicity, in stillness, in being rather than achieving. Her phone buzzed. It was Grant Whitaker. "Ms. Marquette," he said, ever neutral. "Your absence has been noted by the press. They're speculating about your health, your leadership, and your upcoming IPO. Are you prepared to make a statement?" She closed her eyes. "No," she said softly, "but I'm ready to do something better." Later that night, Lena walked alone along the East River, wearing Caleb's old gray hoodie, the one she had never returned. Her breath ghosted in front of her, the cold biting but familiar. She stopped at a bench and pulled out her phone. It was the same prepaid model she'd bought when she disappeared. There was only one number in it. She typed out a message. "You told me I didn't have to earn the space I took up, so I'm coming back not to explain, not to hide, just to stand in that space, if it's still there." She didn't press send right away. She stared at the message like it was a truth too big for a screen. Then, slowly, she tapped the button. Sent. No fanfare, no security team, no PR consultant, just her. Across the country, Caleb had just finished tucking Sophie into bed. He stood by the window sipping lukewarm coffee, watching shadows crawl across the street. He hadn't expected to hear from her again. He'd made peace with that, at least the kind of peace that doesn't sleep soundly but survives. His phone buzzed once. He picked it up, read the message. Twice. Then he sat down, smiled, and whispered almost to himself, "It's still here." In a drawer nearby, he pulled out a small box of paper, the same origami set Sophie had insisted they buy just in case. He folded a single white crane, placed it on the windowsill, and left the light on. Somewhere between regret and hope, he waited not for rescue, not for answers, but for the woman who had once whispered, "Don't Google me," and was now brave enough to say, "I'm coming home." The news broke on a quiet Thursday morning. Caleb hadn't even poured his first cup of coffee when the buzz started his phone vibrating with messages, a ping from an old coworker, a missed call from a number he didn't recognize. He brushed it off at first. Portland moved slowly. There was always something buzzing louder than it needed to. But when he stepped out to grab the mail, Mrs. Ortega met him in the hallway with a tight, meaningful look. "You've seen it," she asked, handing him his newspaper with a yellowed finger. Caleb frowned. Seen what she tapped the front page with the corner of her cane? And there it was. Runaway billionaire reemerges with message of humanity and the man who helped her disappear. His eyes scanned the photo. There she was, Lena sitting across from a suited journalist in a bare sunlit room. No makeup, no styling, just Lena speaking plainly. Raw. Real. Below her image, "I didn't disappear. I just remembered who I was before everyone told me who to be." And the worst or best part, she had said his name. "I stayed with a man named Caleb Rhodes. He didn't ask who I was. He didn't Google me. He just gave me tea and a blanket and space to breathe. For the first time in my life, I wasn't a company. I was just a person, and someone saw me." Caleb stood still in the hallway, the words sinking in like cold rain on bare skin. By the time he turned on the television, the segment was already playing on local morning shows. A rerun clip from the original interview with national syndication. Lena, in profile, her voice steady but soft. The anchors praised her bravery. Online, the internet was on fire. Queen of Reset, CAO of Stillness. The woman who said no to the empire. And Caleb, who had been content with anonymity, was now the quiet beating heart at the center of it all. By midday, a camera crew showed up on the curb outside his apartment. "Mr. Rhodes, can you tell us what Lena was like off camera? Did you two have a relationship? Was she safe while she stayed with you?" He closed the blinds. Sophie stood behind him, holding her bunny tight. "Are they mad?" she whispered. "No, sweetheart," Caleb said gently, crouching to her level. "They're just loud." She wrinkled her nose. "I liked it better when it was quiet." "So did I." That evening he stepped outside for air hoodie, pulled up, hands in his pockets. The sky had turned to soft amber clouds rolling like thoughts he couldn't sort. Across the street, a man in a wool coat approached. Not a reporter. A familiar face. Grant Whitaker. "Off the record," Grant said before Caleb could speak. "I'm not here with a camera. Lena asked me to check in on you." "I'm fine," Caleb replied shortly. "She was worried this would blow back on you. She didn't name you for attention. She named you because it mattered." Caleb exhaled. "I didn't want attention." "I know, but sometimes the story chooses you." He looked away, jaw tight. "I helped her because she was cold, tired, and scared, not because I thought it would end up on the news." Grant nodded, understanding. Before he left, he handed Caleb a small white card. No title, just an address. "She's speaking at a non-profit event next week," Grant said. "First public appearance since the interview. Quiet setting, low profile. Just voices that matter." Caleb looked down at the card. The address was a small community center in Portland. Nothing glamorous, nothing televised. Just Lena standing in a room choosing her words instead of letting them be chosen for her. The week that followed was strange. Caleb got offers from podcasts, magazines, even a coffee brand looking to sponsor the quiet kindness movement. He turned them all down. Sophie, too young to understand the world's noise, asked if Lena would ever come back. Caleb gave her the same answer each time. I think she's trying. When the night of the event arrived, he didn't plan to go. He got off work late. Traffic was bad. The world felt too loud. But then he saw Sophie sitting at the table folding a paper crane with more focus than a 5-year-old usually summoned. She looked up at him. It's for her, in case she's scared. Caleb didn't need more than that. He got in the truck, heart pounding, and drove. The community center was humble, a faded red brick building with string lights draped across the entrance. Inside, no more than 30 people sat in folding chairs, each holding a candle. No press badges, no stages, just a microphone on a stand. And Lena. She stood near the front wearing jeans and a slate gray sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. No makeup, no assistants. When she spotted him, something in her face shifted a flicker of disbelief, then something deeper relief. Their eyes held for 3 seconds too long. She took the mic. I used to think I had to be big to matter, that the louder I was, the more I'd be heard. But the loudest thing anyone ever did for me was stay quiet when I asked them not to ask. The audience was still, moved. I didn't come here to make a statement, she said. I came here to say thank you, to someone who made me feel safe when I had nothing left to give. She turned toward Caleb. You didn't rescue me. You received me. There's a difference. Caleb felt his chest ache. She held up a paper crane. And you reminded me that sometimes the most powerful act of love is just letting someone land. When the applause came, it wasn't thunderous. It was soft, reverent, and somehow louder than anything Caleb had ever heard. She stepped down and walked toward him slowly, uncertain. I didn't know if you'd come, she whispered. I didn't either, he said. They stood for a moment, the world holding its breath. I'm not the same woman you met, she said, but I think I'm better, calmer, and... I missed your terrible coffee, he smiled. I still make it, worse than ever. She laughed softly. Then maybe I should stay long enough to teach you something. And in that moment, no microphones, no spotlight, just the hum of breath and second chances, Caleb reached for her hand. She didn't pull away, and that more than any headline was the only story that mattered. The next morning, Caleb found himself standing in front of the community fridge at the co-op grocery store, debating between oat milk and regular. Sophie had declared a new allergy based on something she saw in a cartoon. He wasn't convinced, but he had learned that picking battles with a 5-year-old philosopher was a losing game. He didn't hear the whispering at first, not until a woman passing behind him leaned closer to her friend and murmured, "That's him. The single dad. The one from the story." He turned, slightly caught their sideways glances, the quickly averted eyes when he met their gaze. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't cruel. But it was attention. And Caleb had never craved to be seen like that. He paid for the groceries and left without incident, but the air outside felt heavier than when he entered. The truth was, he'd given up the illusion that things would go back to the way they were. Lena's truth, spoken in her own words, had cast ripples he hadn't fully anticipated. He stepped into the apartment just as Sophie called out from the living room, "Daddy, she's here." At first his chest seized, but then he heard the light knock at the door gentler than last time. No cameras. No commotion. He opened it to find Lena standing in jeans and a pale blue sweater, hair loose, her shoulders a little more relaxed than the last time they stood face to face. In her hands was a glass jar filled with soup, something brown and hearty. "I traded secrets for recipes," she said with a soft smile. "Seems fair." Caleb stepped aside without a word. Sophie barreled into Lena's knees a second later, arms wrapping around her like she hadn't missed a single beat. "You're back," Sophie said simply. "I am." Sophie pulled her toward the couch, already talking about origami dragons and drawings she'd made. Lena followed, kneeling beside her like no time had passed. Caleb watched from the kitchen, heart full and hesitant all at once. Later, when Sophie was down for a nap and the soup had been eaten in companionable silence, Caleb joined Lena on the small balcony where the early spring air carried a chill just sharp enough to feel. She looked out over the street. You ever notice how many people walk with their heads down? All the time. I used to do that too, out of guilt, out of pressure. Now I think I was just afraid of who'd look back. He leaned against the railing beside her. You looked people in the eye at that community center. I looked at you, she corrected gently. A pause stretched between them. Then I read the comments she admitted. The good ones, the bad ones. People analyzing my tone, dissecting my word choices, trying to decide if I was sincere or strategic. He turned to her. And what did you decide? She glanced at him. That the world doesn't know how to handle sincerity without suspicion. Caleb didn't argue. He knew she was right. I wanted to say more, Lena added after a moment. About you. About what it meant to be allowed to exist without expectation. But I was afraid if I said too much, the media would devour it and turn it into something cheap. You said enough, Caleb said quietly. You didn't owe the world a fairy tale. I didn't owe the world anything, she said, eyes clear. But I owed you truth. She pulled something from her coat pocket, a small velvet pouch. Caleb raised an eyebrow. What's this? Lena held it out. Something I forgot to leave behind. Inside the pouch was the silver corporate ID card, the one that had slipped from her bag the day she broke open. Caleb turned it in his hand. It still shimmered like it had weight in another life. You kept this? He asked. I thought I'd need it again, she replied, to prove I was someone. And now she looked at him not with grand gestures, but with a quiet certainty that stopped him cold. Now I'd rather be someone without it than no one with it. He stared at the card for a long moment before slipping it back into the pouch. Want me to throw it away? No, she said. I want you to keep it. Not as a reminder of who I was, but of what I walked away from. They stood there together, wind teasing the edges of their sleeves, until Lena reached over and took his hand. Not dramatically, not like a scene from a movie, just a simple human gesture. One that said, I'm still here. He squeezed it gently. The next day, the world moved on. There was another story in the headlines, another scandal, another disappearance. Lena's name faded from the news cycle not because she was forgotten, but because she had chosen to stop feeding it. She didn't retreat. She didn't vanish. Instead, she began showing up in small ways, volunteering at the library's literacy program, helping Sophie's preschool paint murals on its cracked walls, sitting beside Caleb at city council meetings about affordable housing. She didn't wear power suits. She wore canvas sneakers and smiled at strangers. And one Saturday morning, while they were planting flowers outside the community center, a woman approached her. You're that CEO, right? The one who walked away. Lena stood, brushed dirt from her knees, and smiled. I'm just Lena, she said. But yeah, I guess that was me. The woman nodded. Takes guts. Lena didn't flinch. Takes kindness, she said, and someone willing to hold the door open when you've forgotten how to knock. Caleb looked up from the soil, his hands covered in earth, and offered her a quiet nod. Because what the world didn't know, couldn't know, was that behind every viral story, every whispered headline, there are moments that never make it to print. Moments where a single dad and a runaway billionaire sit cross-legged in the dirt, planting something that might one day grow roots so deep. No storm could touch them. And that, Caleb thought, was the only legacy that mattered. The living room was still filled with the golden hue of late afternoon sun slanting through the blinds. Sophie was asleep on the couch, her knees curled to her chest, a paper crane resting gently in the crook of her elbow. The apartment smelled faintly of tomato soup and toasted bread. Calm, familiar. Lena stood near the window staring out at the street below. Her coat hung over the back of the chair, her phone silenced on the counter. She had turned off every notification weeks ago. There had been a time in her life when a quiet phone would have triggered panic. Now it felt like oxygen. Caleb watched her from the kitchen drying a mug, his eyes tracing the line of her shoulders. She had changed, but not in dramatic ways. She still moved with purpose. Still had moments where silence stretched too long like a tether she was afraid to cut. But there was a softness in her now, like the muscles beneath her armor had finally remembered how to rest. "You're thinking again," he said, placing the mug on the shelf. She turned, smiling slightly. "Always. Want to tell me where you went just now?" Lena tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I had an offer this morning." Caleb straightened. From who? An organization in Seattle. A think tank for sustainable tech policy. Quiet work, behind the scenes, no cameras, good people. He nodded, slowly, waiting. "They offered me a position on the advisory board. It's part-time, flexible, but—" She hesitated. "It's in Seattle." The weight of those 3 words filled the room. "Do you want it?" he asked. "I thought I did," she said. 2 months ago I would have taken it without blinking. But now—" Her voice softened. "Now I think about things differently." Caleb walked to the table, pulled out a chair, and gestured for her to sit. She did. "I used to chase impact," Lena said, eyes unfocused. "Numbers reach headlines. Now I crave presence. This." She looked around the small, imperfect apartment. Breakfast with Sophie. The sound of your truck engine pulling in. Folding cranes on rainy afternoons. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. But there's a part of me, she added, that still feels like I'm not allowed to stay. Like if I stop moving, I'll rust. Caleb leaned forward. "Lena, you're allowed to want a quieter life. That doesn't make you smaller. That makes you honest." She studied his face, his steady eyes, his calloused hands resting loosely on the table. "Don't you ever wish for more?" she asked. "Sure," he said. "I wish for more time with Sophie, more sleep, fewer bills. But I stopped measuring my worth by what I didn't have a long time ago." Lena swallowed. "And if I stay, you'll be here. That's all I've ever wanted." Her eyes shimmered and she reached across the table, lacing her fingers through his. "I don't know how to be someone's anything," she said softly. "I've only ever been someone's asset." "You're not an asset here," he said. "You're a person, and I like who you are when no one's watching." A tear rolled down her cheek. Not from sadness, from relief. He stood and walked around the table, crouching in front of her. "You don't have to prove anything, Lena," he said gently. "But if you want to be here truly, be here. We'll build something. Together. Quietly. One breath at a time." She laughed through her tears. "That's not very ambitious, you know. It's the most ambitious thing I've ever wanted," he said. "To live a life that's real." Later that evening, the 3 of them sat on the floor with Sophie between them, building a castle from cereal boxes and toilet paper rolls. Lena held a glue stick like it was a scepter. Sophie crowned her queen of cardboard. Caleb just watched, heartful in ways he never imagined possible. Sophie looked up at Lena. "Are you going away again?" Lena shook her head. "No, sweet pea. I think I'm staying." "For how long?" Lena glanced at Caleb, then back at Sophie. "As long as it takes to build a paper kingdom strong enough to last." Sophie nodded solemnly. "Okay, but it needs glitter. Lots of glitter." "We'll add glitter," Caleb promised, smiling. The next day, Lena mailed back the contract from the Seattle offer with a polite decline. In its place, she wrote a handwritten note to the organization's founder. "Thank you for thinking of me. I'm choosing a different kind of work right now, the kind that doesn't involve boardrooms but still requires leadership, patience, and heart. I'm learning to stay. And in staying, I'm building something I never knew I needed." She signed it, simply Lena Marquette. No titles, no accolades, just a woman who had finally realized that staying required more courage than leaving ever did. That evening, she and Caleb sat on the balcony watching the city settle into night. Below, streetlights flickered on. A dog barked in the distance. Somewhere, a neighbor played an old jazz record, scratchy but sweet. Lena leaned her head against Caleb's shoulder. "I used to think home was something you had to earn," she said. "Turns out it's something you allow." He looked down at her. "So, you staying for the waffles tomorrow, only if I get to make the syrup from scratch." "Deal." And there, beneath the hush of stars and the breath of something beautiful blooming slowly, quietly, irrevocably between them, Lena chose to stay. Not out of fear, not out of need, but out of love, out of healing, out of hope. It was spring when Caleb realized the quiet life they'd built was no longer temporary. Not a stopover, not an intermission. Home. The apartment still creaked in the mornings, and the water heater still groaned when both faucets were on. But now there were 3 toothbrushes on the bathroom sink. Lena had claimed the chipped ceramic mug with the faded duck print, Sophie's favorite, and Caleb had stopped pretending it wasn't the best one in the cupboard. They no longer tiptoed around each other. They just lived, with a rhythm as natural as breath. One Saturday morning, Caleb stepped into the living room to find Sophie perched on the floor, gluing googly eyes to cardboard shapes. On the couch beside her sat Lena with a laptop, open, a pencil behind one ear, and a growing pile of notes scattered beside her. She looked up when she saw him. "You're up early," she said. "Am I? Or are you running an office out of our living room again?" She smiled. "Technically, it's a non-profit." Caleb walked over and looked down at the screen. On it was a draft homepage for something called the Kindness File. He raised an eyebrow. "What is this, a project I've been working on?" she said. "Collecting stories of ordinary people who did one kind thing. Quiet things, unnoticed things. Not for credit, not for likes, just because it was right." Caleb stared at the screen for a long moment. The title was simple. The mission statement beneath it even simpler, because the smallest kindness can become the turning point of someone else's life. He swallowed. "This is about me, isn't it?" "It's not," she said. "It's about what you reminded me was possible, what we can remind others." He sat beside her, watching her scroll through submission drafts, some typed, some handwritten, and scanned in. A high school janitor who paid for a student's lunch. A retired nurse who mended coats at the bus stop every winter. A man who once offered his couch and his last clean hoodie to a stranger in the rain. That one wasn't labeled, but he knew. "I don't need to be part of something big," he said softly. "I know," she replied. "That's why this matters." Sophie chimed in without looking up. "Can we put my paper dragons on the website?" Lena laughed. "Only if they promise not to breathe fire on the donors." Caleb sat back and watched them for a while, the 2 people who had walked into his life by accident, one with folded paper, the other with wide eyes and a stuffed rabbit, and stayed by choice. Later that week, Lena invited him to a small event at the community center, where she'd first spoken publicly after returning. This time, there were no cameras. Just folding chairs, home-baked cookies, and a handful of people who had come to share their stories, some hopeful, some still healing. Lena stood in front of the group holding nothing in her hands. No script, no slides. Sometimes the biggest miracle, she said, is not the person who saves you, but the person who sees you when you don't recognize yourself. She paused. "I spent years being told what I was worth based on what I could produce, build, or sell. But when I had nothing to offer, not even my name, someone looked at me and saw a human being. No transaction, no angle, just kindness." Her eyes found Caleb's in the back row. He didn't flinch. "I didn't come back to relive my old life," she continued. "I came back to build a better one. One rooted in service, not success. In truth, not titles. And in the belief that kindness isn't weakness, it's a revolution in disguise." The room was silent. Then someone clapped. Then another. Then all of them. But Caleb didn't clap. He just watched her, a quiet pride blooming in his chest like something sacred. That night, walking home with Sophie asleep in his arms and Lena beside him, Caleb spoke into the stillness of the street. You changed." Lena looked over thoughtful. "I thought I had to become someone new to be whole again. And I didn't. I just had to stop hiding." He smiled. "You're good at being seen now." "I'm learning," she said. "With you, I get to learn." They reached the front steps. Caleb shifted Sophie gently and paused before opening the door. "You sure this is the life you want? It's not shiny. It's slow. It's real." She rested her hand on his arm. "It's more than I ever let myself hope for." Weeks passed. Seasons shifted. And one morning, without fanfare, the kindness file quietly launched online. No marketing blitz. No paid press. Just stories, real ones. From grocery clerks. From grandmothers. From strangers who once handed someone a coat or a meal or a quiet place to rest. And in one corner of the site, buried not on the homepage but deep in the archives, there was a story called "The Man Who Didn't Ask." It didn't name him, but Lena knew, and so did anyone who read it. Because true kindness doesn't need credit. It leaves a mark in smaller ways, in quiet breakfasts, in folded cranes, in spaces that feel like peace. On a slow Sunday morning, as Sophie colored beside them and sunlight warmed the floor, Lena reached for Caleb's hand. "You know," she said, "I used to think love had to be earned." Caleb squeezed her fingers gently. "And now I know sometimes it just shows up, offers you a couch, shares a meal, and waits for you to be ready." He looked at her for a long time. "I'm glad you stayed," he said. "I'm glad you opened the door." And outside on the windowsill a paper crane caught the breeze, its wings fluttering softly ready for flight, but at peace right where it was. We'd love to know where you're watching from. Share your thoughts in the comments below and tell us what part of this story touched you the most. If this story moved you, inspired you, or simply made you pause for a moment, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. There are many more stories like this waiting to be told. Thank you so much for watching and for being part of a community that believes in the quiet power of kindness. See you in the next story.